The jungle doesn't forgive mistakes. In early 1970, deep in the treacherous terrain of Phuoc Tuy province, South Vietnam, a unit of Australian soldiers marched into the unknown. Their mission, root out a hidden enemy entrenched in the infamous Long Hải Hills, a labyrinth of caves, tunnels, and landmines, controlled by one of the most elusive Viet Cong battalions in the war. What they faced was far more than guerrilla warfare. It was a brutal test of survival in terrain designed to kill. This was Operation Hammersley, a high-stakes campaign led by the 7th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, supported by tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles. But even firepower meant little when the enemy was buried underground, and the hills themselves were laced with death. Australia's role in the Vietnam War is often overshadowed by larger American operations. But this battle tells a story of courage, endurance, and jungle warfare at its most intense. It was a clash fought not just with bullets, but against heat, exhaustion, and the ever-present fear of the unseen. This is the untold battle for the Long Hải Hills. This is Operation Hammersley. By 1970, the Vietnam War had become a grinding, relentless conflict. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and booby traps defined the battlefield. For the Australian forces stationed in Phuoc Tuy province, the enemy wasn't just hard to find. They were buried deep in the landscape, emerging only to strike and vanish without a trace. Australia's presence in Vietnam had steadily increased since 1962, but it wasn't until 1966 that they took full control of operations in Phuoc Tuy. Their responsibility was to pacify the province, a task made infinitely harder by the presence of the D445 Viet Cong Battalion. D445 wasn't a typical guerrilla unit. These fighters knew the terrain intimately. They built entire underground networks, bunkers, supply caches, command centers, hidden within the Long Hải Hills, a strategic high ground near the coast. This area had become a notorious Viet Cong stronghold, used to launch attacks, store weapons, and disrupt Australian patrols. Mines, sniper attacks, and sudden ambushes were routine in this region. Repeated Australian attempts to clear the hills had only temporary success. The enemy always returned. Worse, the hills were laced with booby traps and anti-personnel mines, some handmade, others Soviet or Chinese supplied. Every step was a gamble. By late 1969, intelligence revealed that D445 had once again reinforced the Long Hải Hills. Their presence threatened Australian fire bases, patrol routes, and local villages. Commanders knew that unless the hills were cleared once and for all, the Viet Cong would continue to dominate the region. And so a bold operation was conceived, one that would push into the enemy's territory, destroy their bases, and cripple their operations in the south. It would require infantry, armored vehicles, artillery, air support, engineers, and nerves of steel. This would be Operation Hammersley, a name that would soon become synonymous with courage under fire. Operation Hammersley officially began on February 10, 1970, but its roots stretched back weeks prior. Australian intelligence confirmed that elements of the D445 Viet Cong Battalion had returned to the Long Hải Hills. Their presence wasn't just symbolic. It was a direct threat to local pacification efforts in Australian fire bases in the region. The plan was simple in theory, but dangerous in execution. Sweep through the hills, locate and destroy enemy bunkers, supply caches, tunnel complexes, and landmine stockpiles. The operation would also aim to sever the Viet Cong's access to nearby villages and coastal resupply routes. In short, it was a deep strike into the heart of enemy-held terrain. The main assault force would be the 7th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, 7RAR, a combat-proven unit known for its discipline and resilience. They would be supported by elements from the 1st Armored Regiment, wielding Centurion tanks, and M113 armored personnel carriers from the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. Artillery support came from the 1st Field Regiment, ready to deliver heavy firepower when needed. Engineers from the 1st Field Squadron would be essential for clearing mines and demolishing bunkers. In coordination with American and South Vietnamese forces, the Australians prepared for a prolonged campaign. Supply lines were established, medevac protocols reviewed, and intelligence officers pored over aerial reconnaissance to identify likely enemy positions. This wasn't going to be a quick in-and-out raid. The terrain alone made movement slow and dangerous. The Viet Cong had home field advantage. Hidden bunkers, traps, and sniper nests everywhere. But Australian commanders knew this operation had to succeed. The Long Hải Hills could no longer be a safe haven for the enemy. The time had come to face the jungle and whatever was waiting inside it. The opening days of Operation Hammersley were a brutal introduction to the kind of war the Australians would face in the Long Hải Hills. On February 10th, 7 RAR began its advance, moving cautiously into the area just west of the hills. Almost immediately, the jungle reminded them that nothing came easy here. The dense foliage, limited visibility, and the heat was suffocating. Every step was measured. Every tree could hide a sniper, and every patch of ground might be wired to kill. It didn't take long for the first contact. A forward patrol triggered a Claymore-style booby trap, wounding 2 soldiers. Moments later, the unit came under small arms fire from concealed VC positions. The Australians responded with disciplined return fire and quickly called in artillery support, forcing the attackers to withdraw. It was a textbook response, but it showed just how quickly things could go wrong. Throughout the week, 7 RAR patrolled deeper into the area. They began uncovering a network of abandoned bunkers and destroyed supply caches. Some positions had been recently used, still stocked with ammunition and food. Others were eerily empty, the Viet Cong having vanished just before the Australians arrived. The threat of mines and improvised explosive devices was constant. Soldiers walked in single file, eyes scanning the ground, ears tuned to the unnatural. The engineers worked tirelessly ahead of patrols, using mine detectors and bare hands to disarm deadly traps. One M113 armored vehicle hit a mine concealed beneath foliage, blowing off its front left track and wounding its crew. The vehicle was later recovered, but it underscored the danger faced even by armored units. Despite the challenges, the Australians were making progress. Dozens of bunkers were located and destroyed. Hidden ammunition dumps were detonated. Maps were updated with new tunnel locations. Still, they hadn't yet drawn out the full strength of D445. The Viet Cong were holding back, watching, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The Australians knew it was coming. They could feel it in the jungle, that thick silence before the storm. Before we move into the full-scale combat that would define Operation Hammersley, ask yourself, had you ever heard this story before today? If this kind of detail, tension, and forgotten history speaks to you, give the video a like. It might seem small, but it helps us reach others who want to uncover the real battles behind the headlines. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. We cover stories just like this, raw, untold, and real. Now let's step into the heart of the Long Hải Hills, where the real fight was just beginning. The turning point of Operation Hammersley came in the final days of February. After more than a week of skirmishes, booby traps, and cautious patrols, Australian forces began pushing deeper into the heart of the Long Hải Hills. Intelligence suggested the presence of a major Viet Cong base hidden within a dense section of jungle, fortified with tunnels and camouflage bunkers. This was no longer a routine sweep. It was a hunt for the enemy's core stronghold. On February 22nd, a company from 7 RAR moved to investigate a suspected bunker system. As they approached the site, the lead elements came under sudden, concentrated small arms and machine gun fire. The Viet Cong had sprung their trap. The Australians hit the dirt, returning fire as the jungle exploded with noise. The enemy was well entrenched, using elevated firing positions and pre-sighted fields of fire. It was a carefully prepared ambush. Within minutes, radio calls requested support. Artillery batteries from the 1st Field Regiment zeroed in, pounding the hillside with high explosives. Centurion tanks and M113s were brought forward, their armor shrugging off small arms fire as they rumbled into the kill zone. The Centurions opened fire with their 20-pounder main guns and coaxial machine guns, tearing through the jungle and bunker walls. Air support arrived overhead, dropping ordnance on suspected fallback positions. The ground shook, and the jungle lit up in bursts of fire and smoke. The fighting raged for hours. Despite their fortified position, the Viet Cong began to break. Some tried to flee through escape tunnels. Others stayed behind, determined to delay the Australians as long as possible. By nightfall, the area was secured, but it came at a cost. Several Australians were wounded, and one was killed during the assault. As engineers moved in, they uncovered what the VC had tried to hide: an extensive tunnel complex with command bunkers, sleeping quarters, medical stations, and large weapons caches. Some tunnels were booby-trapped. Others had been hastily abandoned. It was clear the Australians had stumbled onto a major operational center of the D445 Battalion. Over the next several days, additional combat broke out as patrols uncovered more outposts and small VC rearguards. These weren't mass engagements, but sharp, violent encounters. The enemy would strike quickly and fade away, leaving behind traps and casualties. But the psychological momentum had shifted. The Viet Cong had lost one of their most important strongholds, and for the first time in months, Australian forces had gained a firm foothold in the Long Hải Hills. Operation Hammersley was no longer a search mission. It had become a direct assault, and Australia was winning. After the intense combat of late February, it became clear that the Viet Cong were no longer fighting to hold ground. They were fighting to escape. Scouts reported signs of hurried withdrawals, blood trails leading into dense vegetation, half-buried caches, and abandoned packs filled with documents, maps, and personal effects. What had once been a well-organized VC-based system was unraveling. The D445 Battalion, battered and outmaneuvered, was melting back into the jungle. But retreat didn't mean safety for the Australians. If anything, the enemy's retreat signaled a different kind of danger: desperation. In the following days, Australian patrols continued their sweeps, but with heightened caution. The terrain was now mined more heavily than before. Claymores, tripwires, and pressure plates were buried across likely approach routes. One misstep could undo an entire operation. Engineers led the way, crawling, probing, detecting. They worked in silence, often under cover of riflemen scanning for snipers. One misjudged step could be fatal, and in several tragic cases it was. As 7 RAR moved through the last remaining pockets of resistance, they discovered more tunnel networks. Most of them collapsed or rigged to explode. The Viet Cong had either destroyed them or set traps to punish anyone who dared follow. Some tunnels extended deep into the hills, wide enough for a man to crawl through with equipment. These were not just hiding spots. They were full-fledged operating bases, built over years of hidden labor. Despite the danger, Australians persisted. Day after day, they destroyed bunker systems, burned supply dumps, and rendered tunnels unusable with explosive charges. A few short engagements broke out with rearguard VC fighters, but these were quickly suppressed. By early March, the Long Hải Hills were no longer a stronghold. They were a scarred battlefield, silent and emptied. The D445 Battalion, though not annihilated, had been severely disrupted. Their command network was shattered, their weapons caches destroyed, and their ability to launch coordinated attacks in the region was crippled. Operation Hammersley was nearing its end. The hills that had once been a Viet Cong fortress were now under Australian control, at least for now. But every soldier knew, in Vietnam, the jungle never stayed quiet for long. By the time Operation Hammersley concluded on March 9, 1970, it was clear the Australians had achieved a hard-won victory. The mission had lasted nearly a full month, and in that time, 7th RAR and supporting units had cleared large portions of the Long Hải Hills, destroyed extensive Viet Cong infrastructure, and struck a decisive blow against the D445 Battalion. Over 90 bunker systems were located and destroyed. Miles of tunnel networks were mapped, collapsed, or demolished. Large weapons caches were seized, including mortars, mines, AK-47 rifles, ammunition stockpiles, and food reserves. Intelligence documents captured during the sweep revealed enemy plans, command structures, and safe house locations throughout Phuoc Tuy province. Most importantly, the Viet Cong had been forced to abandon one of their most valuable strategic positions. Their ability to stage attacks from the Long Hải Hills, once a major threat to both Australian forces and local civilians, was effectively neutralized. But the operation came at a cost. 9 Australian soldiers lost their lives, and dozens more were wounded. Many of the casualties came from mines and booby traps, rather than direct combat. It was a stark reminder of the kind of war being fought in Vietnam. A war where danger didn't just come from bullets, but from the ground itself. For the D445 Battalion, the losses were significant, though exact numbers remain unknown. What is clear is that they were no longer capable of mounting serious operations in the area for some time. Hammersley was considered a tactical and operational success, and it reinforced the importance of coordinated, multi-branch operations involving infantry, armor, engineers, artillery, and air support. It also validated Australian doctrine focused on patrolling, ambush disruption, and jungle warfare, tactics that would be carried into future operations. Operation Hammersley may not be as well known as battles like Long Tan or Coral Balmoral, but for those who fought there, it left a lasting mark, both physically and mentally. The operation showcased the Australian Army's adaptability in one of the most unforgiving environments of the Vietnam War. In the dense jungle and treacherous hills, Australian troops demonstrated discipline, precision, and cohesion. It was a textbook example of how combined arms warfare, infantry working hand in hand with armor, artillery, engineers, and air support, could overcome even the most entrenched guerrilla forces. It also highlighted the hidden dangers of jungle warfare. While traditional battles involved lines and fronts, the war in Phuoc Tuy was different. Mines, traps, snipers, tunnels. The enemy was invisible until the moment they struck. Hammersley proved that the true battle wasn't just against men with guns, but against an environment designed to kill. In the years that followed, the lessons learned from Hammersley would influence Australian military doctrine, especially in areas of mine detection, tunnel clearance, and jungle movement tactics. The psychological and physical demands of such operations reshaped how Australia trained its soldiers for combat in similar conditions. And though the D445 Battalion would eventually regroup and fight again, their setback in the Long Hải Hills stood as proof that Australia's soldiers could, and would, take the fight to the enemy's doorstep, no matter how dangerous it might be. Operation Hammersley wasn't about territory. It was about denying the enemy sanctuary and proving that even in the most hostile terrain, discipline and determination could win the day. For the men of 7RAR and their supporting units, this wasn't just another mission. It was a deadly game of patience, nerves, and grit. Every hill cleared, every tunnel destroyed, was paid for in sweat, blood, and silent courage. Though their names rarely make the headlines, the soldiers who fought in Phuoc Tuy left a legacy, one carved into the jungle and into military history. If you want to hear more of these untold stories, the kind that don't make it into textbooks, consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more battles like Hammersley, buried in silence, waiting to be uncovered. This was a fight against the hidden enemy. This was Operation Hammersley.